Hello guys, welcome. Today I wanted to stream and talk a little bit about some drafting, well not necessarily issues, about some drafting concepts that came up when we had a team discussion with my Team Black. So those were the first few things I wanted to mention. When I was discussing this with my team, I said before to them that this was going to be, because the scrim got cancelled, I said before, right, it's not going to be so long, it's only going to take possibly 1 hour. I don't want to talk about everything, I just want to quickly mention some changes that we're going to bring into the draft while still sticking with the original plan. Still doing the same things that we used to do, but just changing up a little bit so we have some more agency in the early game. So we don't just completely sit back, do nothing, and automatically lose the game because we only have the feeling that we can achieve something by the 20-minute 2-item mark. I was asked to play Valorant, but one of the most the few important things that came up in the discussion that we had were so it's the understanding of weak side and strong side of the map. I have to I'll make it a little bit, if I can type, Jesus, thank you. I'll make it a little bit larger so everybody can read it. How do I do this? Let's go. This should be okay. So weak side and strong side of the map. You have out drafting versus comfort picks, and with out drafting versus comfort picks, you also have like personal champion pool versus meta picks. Those are like that. Of course they can be the same thing. Like if Ornn is incredibly meta, you just enjoy playing Ornn, then Ornn falls under both categories. But there's also a lot of players that have differences between what they like to play and what is good to play in competitive. For example, I'm an Aurelion Sol one trick. You're never gonna see Aurelion Sol in competitive just because it's so easy to play around him and he has so many hard counters, and he also got nerfed incredibly hard. So that's many good reasons to not pick him, but yet I still play him in solo queue because it's one of the few champs that I actually enjoy. So those kind of differences are something that a coach has to take into account when he's drafting for his team. Then also the fact that scaling is relative. Draft is fluid. I'll explain everything later though. This all was it all basically sums up the same thing, but being that patch notes, and of course the patch notes depend on the draft and on scaling and on personal champion pools. So if a patch changes, then maybe your personal champion pool becomes the meta picks. So then you don't have the issue between choosing what you like to play and choosing what's best to play or what you're comfortable playing. But then of course that's all dependent. And then I think one of the most important things for drafting itself, because these previous things are more actually in-game related, is to have a strong drafting core as what you would first pick. And then are you gonna ban counters or ban comfort of the enemy? Let's make this, let's see. Let's go like this when we look at these things. So the whole discussion that we've been having quite a lot of times is which side of the map is going to be the weak side, and what does it mean to be the weak side of the map, and when are you weak side of the map. So one of the most common team compositions that we face in like high diamond, low master, we've even played against grandmaster teams in those kind of elos, and then in semi-professional or sub ERL regios. And this is like for most of the teams that we have faced, this would be like an ideal team composition that they basically every time want to run. And that's mostly because this is very straightforward. Like, these are all champions, they want to move forward, they have forward moving abilities, whereas Syndra's is probably the least obvious, but her E still moves forward and it pushes, even though it pushes people away, it's still damage and it's peel. It has so many uses. And then let's say into this you pick, of course, because they have, not looking at bans are completely irrelevant. You could swap out any of these champions and still have the same concept. Let's say, and we're gonna pick Syndra's got a shitty fucking. Oh, this is what we've been playing. So, example, you pick Corki because Corki can build Hex Drinker, and Azir has to wait until he has 2 items before he can realistically build a Banshee's Veil. So, talking about weak side and a strong side of the map, and I'm gonna be talking about the red side, the red team, because this would represent what my team would be playing into the enemy team most. Because you have like you have Braum to counter the Misfortune ult and the Syndra ult and the Ornn ult, so this is a little bit of an optimized situation. But like, what would red sides or red teams strong side be during laning phase, like the first 20 minutes of the game, when there's not really there's not such a big objective as like like Drake Soul or Elder Dragon or Baron is up, and not everybody is grouping. Now you could say, alright, so like, okay, top lane has priority because Aatrox is stronger early game than Ornn is early game. Ornn outskills the Aatrox. Then on the other parts of the map, Corki outskills the Syndra, and Aphelios outskills the Misfortune, and Braum counters Nautilus because Nautilus needs to hook in and Braum wants people to come into him. So looking at it that way, as one way of seeing what lane can be strong side is saying like, hey, alright, so Graves is gonna play around top side because top lane is, for the early stages of the game, the stronger lane in the isolated 1v1 matchup. Yeah, nice, feels good. But another way of looking at what is the strong side of the map is looking at what kind of power spikes certain champions have. And in this example, Graves is a late game scaling champion, so he needs 2 items or more. Corki is a late game scaling champion, he needs 2 items or more. Aphelios is a late game champion, he needs 2 items or more. So there's not a lot of, if you look at item wise, there's not a lot of agency within these 4 picks to make something happen and to get an advantage or to contest something, to invade, to get dragons, all those kind of things, all the things that you win games with basically. Another, I think, better way of looking at what you can consider a weak side and a strong side of the map is see where you have the setup to make stuff happen. It doesn't necessarily matter that you have a lot of late game scaling, because you can still be the first to move and you can still have priority or pressure in your lane, and you can still gank those kind of lanes in 3v2 or even 3v3 situations and get out ahead. And for us, one of the conditions that then have to be met is that you can, either the jungler is enabled by the lanes with setup, or the jungler himself enables the lanes with gank setup, and gank setup of course meaning CC or a hard gap close, so you can get on top of the enemy and you can do your damage. But CC is the best option, because if you have CC, well, of course Graves doesn't have, Corki doesn't have, Felix doesn't have, Braum doesn't have instant CC because his ult takes a while to charge, or at least the casting time for the ult to move across the part of the map where it hits. And if you want to proc his passive with the stun, that also takes some time, so there's no direct hard CC. So it's very hard for the champions to follow up. Even though Graves has a dash and Corki has a dash, because they cannot lock down the Syndra, it's very hard for them to actually make something happen. So in this situation, you have top lane being the strong side of the map, just to the nature of Aatrox having CC and being able to set up pressure onto the Ornn with the Graves because there's lockdown potential. Then if you look at the other team, every single lane has CC because Ornn can CC, Syndra has Scatter of the Weak, which is slightly less reliable, and of course she knocks people away, so that's not ideal. And bot lane of course is the Nautilus hook, and then the auto attack, which also stuns people. So in that aspect, the blue team already enables all their single lanes for ganks to create advantages on the map, just because the amount of CC they have in every single lane. And on top of that, their jungler can also enable himself because he has CC and he has a gap close. So for blue side, even though they get outskilled, it's going to be a lot easier for them to play the game because it's a lot more straightforward for them to create advantages in lanes. And a very easy way to sort of fix this problem is by only swapping around the junglers. In this situation, it doesn't even matter that your mid laner and your bot laner don't have any direct setup for the jungler to either gank or to move or to get priority, because the jungler has his own setup that he can use to create advantages for either himself or for the team. So now Jarvan can just gank bot lane. Let's see, or get out. Jarvan can just go bot lane, and if Misfortune and if Misfortune and Nautilus are slightly overextending, they can just EQ in. They have to burn flash, otherwise they're dead basically, because it's a 3v2 situation, and they're not. Let's say they're not strong enough to 2v3 that and get like a triple kill for Misfortune. So basically normal situation, then they're gonna have to use flash and heal probably to get out and escape. Then it's very easy of course for the Jarvan to just wait 1 minute, let them overextend. Maybe Aphelios and Braum can freeze the wave in front of their turret. That means that they would have to overextend. Jarvan comes back, they get a free kill. Same of course also goes for the mid lane. If Jarvan once burns the flash of the Syndra, then Syndra has to overextend to catch the waves, and it's just easy setup. And it's another way of enabling your team, because it doesn't necessarily mean that the kills have to go towards the Jarvan, because Jarvan is the one that sets it up. If you give the kills to Corki or Aphelios, you're only gonna increase the scaling that they have, and you're gonna not necessarily decrease the scaling that those champions have, because they're still going to be valuable in their own way. But you're making your own team a lot stronger, and that is also a little bit the situation with ganking an Ornn lane. Because Ornn scales very well with items, of course, because he's a tank, so he gets tankier when he buys more items. Logical. But Ornn is also one of the few tanks that scales really well with levels, because he gets the upgrades from the Ornn items. Then what happens if a Jarvan, or even if it's the other way around, like the first draft, if a Graves decides to gank an Ornn, and even if it works out, the only thing that you're doing is you're delaying the scaling that the Ornn naturally already has with the ornament upgrades that he gets through levels. So that feels a little bit like a reactive play. You're reacting to what the enemy has, which is like the incredible scaling and value that Ornn adds to your team, and you're reacting to that by delaying the power spike that Ornn has for himself and that Ornn can give to the team. And me and the other coaches believe that a better way of playing the game into a certain situation is to be proactive. So instead of being reactive on the Ornn pick and trying to delay the scaling that Ornn has, you should try to get to increase the scaling on the strong champions that you have. And then if you look at the draft like this, like, alright, Ornn is going to scale regardless. there's not a lot we can do about that because he's gonna get his levels anyway and he's gonna be strong anyway. Can camp him all he wants, but then let's say you camp Ornn, the rest of your map loses and Aphelios and Corki never get online. Still gonna lose the game. So then you should in jungle pick something that can increase the scaling of the strong champions that you already have, because Aatrox naturally should already be winning in lane versus the Ornn, because Aatrox is a stronger early and mid game pick than the Ornn is, and Aatrox is gonna get outskilled no matter what. Doesn't matter how many times you camp in, there's gonna be a certain point in the game where the Ornn is gonna be more useful than the Aatrox. So then, thinking about trying to increase the scaling on the bot lane, you might swap the jungle pick over to something that can create his own setup and can give the kills to the mid lane or to the bot lane to increase what they want to do. Then, this was a little bit off track. So this is also a short point towards scaling. That because of course I've been talking a lot about scaling and everybody talks always about scaling. I think the biggest thing to realize is that scaling is relative and that certain picks don't necessarily descale as hard as everybody else thinks. So let's say if red team has a LeBlanc, and everybody always says that LeBlanc is such an early game heavy champion, and by saying that she's such an early game heavy champion, you're basically also saying that she's fucking useless late game, which is not exactly true in the case. Like a LeBlanc can still do a fuck ton of damage once she has 4 or 5 items. That's not something to be underestimated. It's not like, oh, this LeBlanc is late game, I'm just not gonna flash away or use any summoners. Renekton on the other hand, even though of course he has his double dash when he goes through minions, but Renekton doesn't have the assassination and escape and mobility that a LeBlanc has. So Renekton is a lot less scary in the late game than let's say a LeBlanc, even though people consider both of them to be extremely early. And if you would pick both of them in the same draft, people would say that would be a Sinner's comp. I do agree with the Renekton part, because in the late game team fight, Renekton is gonna run at these people, he's just gonna get blown up, and then you have dead weight, and you just might as well just pick Mundo, because Mundo is going to be tankier than the Renekton. And maybe Renekton wins the lane versus Ornn. Maybe he gets the first turret. Oh, what then? Alright, then he has the first turret, then Ornn is still going to be useful, and how is Renekton ever going to gank the enemy bot lane or whatever? Then you're just giving free time to the Ornn. And the Ornn is going to skill regardless. But the LeBlanc on the other hand, because Nautilus wants to step up, Jarvan wants to step up, Ornn wants to move forward, also to be the front line, you're automatically on the front position. This gives a nice window for LeBlanc to engage onto the enemy team. So then in this case, a LeBlanc pick, even though people say, and she of course is very strong in the early game, even though LeBlanc is a very strong early game pick, it doesn't mean that she's completely useless in the late game. And one of the other things, of course, is with scaling being relative, that it really depends on what you pick into it. So if you say the top lane matchup is going to be Aatrox versus Renekton, in this situation, the Aatrox is going to outscale the Renekton. Just because everybody knows Renekton is incredibly early game and Aatrox is early/mid game. So at a certain point in the game, the Aatrox is by definition going to be stronger. By default gonna be stronger than the Renekton if like the game is even, or even if the Aatrox is slightly behind. But let's say if you pick Aatrox and you put him versus a Gangplank, or I wanted to even select Kill, now we have the opposite situation. Now the Aatrox is gonna get outskilled by the Gangplank. And what this sort of means is that you don't necessarily have to pick the most hyper late game scaling picks, or that you don't have to pick the absolute PogChamp of scaling champions, because you can still outscale people while not being completely fucked in the early game. And I think GP is one of the few picks that can still handle himself so well despite being such a well scaling champion. And then the thing about it's a more a combination of both. With the draft is fluid, patch notes, and also the personal champion pool versus meta picks. Of course, I've talked a little bit about that already, being that if you're like me and if you're sort of a one trick, you just very much enjoy playing one champion, and all of a sudden he gets buffed or his hard counter picks get nerfed, then that champion rises in priority in competitive play, and that means that you can use him more often, that you can pick him. But normally, people always have like a champion pool of champions that they're sort of, you could say, attracted to. It's just the champions just draw certain players to them by the way they play, by the way that the player is, and of course the meta changes every however fast it is or slow. I mean, we've had tank meta, we've had Arnett meta, assassin meta, we have everything. And then if your champion pool doesn't fit that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not fit to play competitive. Because if you can play your champions better than what the opponent is picking as meta, then you can of course still mechanically outplay them. And on the other hand, you could also pick something that counters what the enemy is trying to do. And even though they might have a pick that is being played a lot, you could still counter that a lot. So of course it's slightly more obvious that if the enemy picks Ornn, you want to pick Braum or Yasuo, because they can both block the Ornn ult. But people have figured it out already. But what if you would say that Elise is the counter pick to Ornn, and Elise is not really meta because everybody's of course hating on the early game champions, but Elise can basically interrupt the Ornn engage. And so there's many, or like let's say Cho'Gath can silence him, can knock him up. There's no way that Ornn can actually like get off his ultimate, even unless he is like completely out of range. But if you don't think about drafting as only something that you could think about certain champions that other people play, then you're never really gonna get further ahead. That's a little bit the point that I'm trying to make. Like scaling is relative, so it's always thinking about what is happening, and this is of course what is the draft is fluid. Like patch notes change, champion strengths and weaknesses change, new champions are being added. If you know that you are better on Aatrox than whoever is it, not like this, like you're an attack speed any top lane main, and you're just high elo, you know that you can beat this Aatrox, like why not go for it? But also maybe if they pick Aatrox and they pick a lot of engaged champions, then and they're all short range and melee, then maybe Annie might even be a good pick, because she has with her ultimate and the 4 stacks of her passive, she has a very strong AoE stun that can basically stop the entire enemy team from engaging onto them. So in that way, it's also good to keep thinking about what the players want to play into certain matchups, because maybe there's something that you haven't thought of, and maybe you can also teach the player something or give them a pick that they haven't thought of, and then in that way it's a learning experience from both sides, instead of just being a draft where one guy says, all right, you have to do this, this and this, and then you're going to automatically win the game, blah blah blah. Maybe the players don't enjoy it, maybe then they play it they play the matchup worse and they lose the game, they're tilted. There's so many more aspects that happen around the draft that make it that even if you have a successful draft, you could still win, or you could still lose the game. And then the last thing, which is also something that is quite something to think about, is in what order do you want to draft your team? So most team compositions have a core of, let's say, 2 or 3 champions. So if you want to go poke lane, you go like this. You go Zoe, and if you want to go full fucking balls to the walls, you go Jace. Now you have poke. What is the enemy gonna do? They're just not gonna survive after one spell rotation. This is the only one one way. No, not like that. This is. Fuck! I got fucking distracted. No, this is, of course, if you draft this, there's two different options that you have in the bans, because of course the bans are gonna decide what the enemy team is going to pick, and this is what I wanted to say. So theoretically, what beats poke is hard engage. The only downside is that they also have a lot of mobility, so picking Ornn would be slightly off because you can dodge it, and he can outrun it, and you can still pick Braum unless you ban it, or Thresh with mobility. Or even Yasuo, and then whatever, play Yasuo support, basically only for the wind wall. Or you can pick something that can interrupt the Ornn ult. You can pick a tank that can just face tank the Ornn ult and all the damage that the enemy team has. And you can still keep on poking, and he's gonna regenerate no matter what, or doesn't even matter. But then the difficulty that you have as a team is, are you gonna ban out counter picks for what you want to do, or you're gonna ban out comfort picks from the enemy? So let's see, Zoe got absolutely shit on by Syndra, and Ezreal gets absolutely shit on by Misfortune. Oh, not even by Misfortune, by Draven. And then Jace gets absolutely shit on by Aatrox. Are you just gonna ban these champions? Because then the enemy team might think, hey, alright, even though Syndra counters a lot, so that's slightly less obvious, but then if you do it like this, then the enemy could say, oh, but I already know what they're gonna play. Or what if the enemy mid laner is an Akali one trick? Are you gonna ban the Akali just to target ban him, and then after first picking Zoe, you get the R3 Syndra to just completely shut down the Zoe? If she ever ults, then Syndra knows where she is, and Syndra can just annihilate her because it's so telegraphed where the Zoe is gonna land after her ultimate. These are like all things that you would have to take into consideration when you're drafting. Like, is how comfortable, and this is also then related to the personal champion pool versus meta picks. How comfortable are your players in, first, like the coach's ability to draft something that is stronger than the opponents, and how comfortable are they in playing the matchup? If your mid laner or if your AD carry or your top laner doesn't play the champions, then if you put them in like hard matchups, and they're not comfortable in those matchups, then it's probably worth banning it. The only thing then is that you risk facing somebody on his comfort pick, and then maybe your team comp is superior, and if you have a strong game plan, so the strong game plan from blue side would now be, we just poke them, and once we've poked them out, now we have a tank, and so we have a Nautilus. So we poke them, Mundo face tanks everything for us. Mundo is jungle, by the way. That's just the fucking flex pick. And once they're low, Nautilus just flash ult somebody and we just kill them, and then we have an advantage on the map, and then we can pressure, get drakes, and basically win the game. Then it's only the question, is your team confident enough to play these kind of things, if they're meta, into the comfort picks of the enemy team? And then even by saying this, you're picking all pokes, so the enemy can say, oh, but then we're gonna go hard engage. And that's a little bit one of the, no, not a little bit, that's like one of the biggest fucking struggles that there is in drafting. Like, at what moment in the draft are you gonna say what you're gonna do? And at what moment are you gonna be sneaky and have flex picks or have picks that don't really mean a lot? That's all something to take into consideration. And it's really hard because with every single ban, you could say that you know what the enemy team wants to do. If they ban Ornn, if blue side bans Ornn, it's like, alright, fuck. Then you already know, as red side, blue team doesn't want to get engaged on because they ban Ornn, and Ornn is like the freest engage. So you just go, alright. And then even in this, it's even a good example because the enemy team doesn't like you engaging on them because they just want to poke you from a distance. So just pick Maokai Bard. You just ult on top of them. They have to use their mobility abilities. You fucking bash your head into them as Maokai. You have some DPS. You have some nice jungle clear, and you just win the game. So even by banning everything, you can already say, alright, this is what we're gonna play. And then on red side they ban Set. Right, but why would you ban Set? Set is good versus engaged teams, and the enemy team has already shown that they don't want to prioritize one of the main engaged tools that they have. And yeah, maybe Set is a flex pick in the bot lane, and you don't know if he's going bot, mid, jungle, or top lane, but that doesn't matter because the role that Set has in a draft stays the same. That doesn't change by which role you put him in, and it's very telegraphed that you want to play a sort of disengage composition and then counter engage with the Set ultimate. So if people ban Ornn and you counter ban with Set, it's like you're a little bit just fucking yourself, because the enemy team shows that they hate playing against engage, and you're basically banning something that they might be able to and you're basically just saying, all right, yeah, we're gonna play disengage. On the other hand, could also be nice. Maybe if they want to prioritize Set, then you could say like, all right, so now you can't engage on us because we have Set, but then you're still like, all right, but then we can just flex around it, and we can play the poke game, because maybe they want to play poke and then they pick Set. So like, all right, then we go Zoe and Ezreal, and then by not banning Set, you've baited them into picking Set, because they actually want to play poke, but Set is too OP to leave open, and Set is such a good disengage champion. And because they want to play poke, they need disengage in order for the poke champions to survive. And now you're like, alright, so they banned engage, they pick disengage, now we're gonna play the poke, and then blue team doesn't have a fucking clue what to do anymore. Because they can't pick more engage, because you have a Set and you have the rest all forward moving engage champions, you just have one character that's running forward, is doing nothing, getting kited. So, like in this scenario, red team has already won the draft just by not banning something and baiting the enemy team into picking something. But this is of course really hard, because not everybody has the same level of understanding of how draft works, how team compositions work into each other, and also what we do most of the time. You just ban enemy comfort picks. Like, because if you take the enemy away from something they're really good at, let's say you're versus a Cassiopeia one trick, you're gonna ban a Cassiopeia one trick, because no matter what you do, she's gonna be able to play her own isolated matchup, and the team fights from her perspective really well. But that's then a decision that the team with the coaches have to make in order to see how big of an impact they think that the champion is going to be. And these are of course then there's more things that you have to consider in draft. Like, it's such an extensive aspect of the game, and it's so important. But then because it's so important, and also because it's so because there's so many different sides to it, it's really difficult to explain. Not difficult to talk about, I can do that for fucking hours. But also difficult to fully understand. And I think it's good if there's more understanding from players and coaches about how each party feels about what is being done in the game and what is being played out. Because I do believe that if you have a strong draft that sort of counters the enemy, and you have a little bit of comfort in there, and you have good setups, and don't have the weakest early game, and you have a strong mid game, you have an incredibly strong late game, then by counterpicking the enemy and by knowing what their bans say, so they ban Ornn, okay, they don't want to play engage, we're going to bait them into picking Set, then we pick poke. Then by knowing what the champions do and what the enemy team is showing as their cards, let's say, that gives a very clear idea for your team of how they should play the game in order to win the game. And that just makes the game a lot easier for everybody that's around. Then finally, I also wanted, well, not finally, it's been quite some time already, I wanted to discuss some EU Masters draft, because I have not, one of the few pro games that I have not seen while trying to sort of follow the matches. So I do, of course, because I've seen it, I do know who has won, but I just wanted to talk about the drafts and see if I could pick something up, see if there's changes that I would have made, see if there's this just slight differences that might be important to what is happening. Bands are maybe a little bit less interesting for me. I mean, Syndra is just a very, very, very strong pick on either even blue side or red side. Graves is a strong jungler. Senna gives a very clear path for the way that you want to play. You want to play back to front. You want to have a safe backline, preferably. Some DPS if the enemy team picks tanks. And then Thresh, I don't know, maybe the Kasing is a Thresh main, and Ornn is of course very easy engaged. Varus is a very strong AD carry that's being picked a lot, and one of the strong sides of Varus is that he has a lot of modes. He can go lethality, he can go attack speed. But maybe just like don't ban the Thresh and let them pick. Don't ban the Thresh. Let them pick Varus, and then you can pick Lockdown, and then without a Thresh, then the Varus has no escape ability, well, except for flashing. And then, what are they gonna do? You have an AD carry that's standing there by yourself. So by baiting the enemy team into picking something, you're already playing into what you want to do. I think Bard of a very heavy roaming champion. That's probably because they picked Ezreal, and Ezreal is such a self-sufficient laner. They're saying, alright, Ezreal has the capabilities to just stand in this lane by himself, just farm it up, while my support roams. That's probably why they also banned the Bard. I would say that that's a very, very reasonable option, because the Ezreal is just so hard to kill, and especially if he gets to the early laning phase, he just has tear. There's not a lot you can do to stop it. Yuumi, of course, the same, very strong. Don't know why they didn't just R1, R2, Ezreal, Yuumi, because Excel didn't pick an AD carry, so you're still taking picks away from them. And of course, LDLC banned Kalista and Draven, who are quite good versus an Ezreal, like the two main champions you've seen that can shut down an Ezreal early on and actually keep him down. And then onto the actual picking itself. So Excel opened with a B1 set pick. Of course, set is still like a fine and a strong champion. Just that people have learned to play around it, and it's still, as with like every other champion that is being played a lot in competitive, after a certain time people just know what the champion does, and they see ways to play around what the champion wants to do. So by picking set first, even though LDLC banned Ornn, you're already saying, alright, we want you guys to run into us. And then, because they're so telegraphed on what they want to do, then LDLC can immediately think, alright, so they want to play a sort of disengaged composition with the first pick priority on set. So we're not going to engage on you, we're just going to poke. And that's also, strangely enough, well, of course I've seen this draft, so maybe it was because I read this draft and that I did it before myself. So we're going to pick Zoe. We're never going to engage on you, we're just going to poke you out and wait until you are low. And then once you are low, we're going to move in for the final blow, or we're going to force you to go base or otherwise die, and then we're going to take objectives. And besides that, Zoe of course also has a lot of zoning control around objective, with the amount of walls that there are, with the bubbles getting increased range. And then Trundle, of course, not necessarily a hard engaged champion. I think he has also quite an okay isolated matchup into set. If the set is possibly a jungle pick, it could of course also be top lane or support. But then the Trundle is something that can properly disengage a fight, and he can be the tanky frontline that a Zoe needs for her to be able to protect herself. And then Excel just goes full fucking LS style Sinner mode, and they pick Lee Sin together with LeBlanc. It's just, to put it nice, it's just fucking incredibly bad, because you have a champion and set, but I said before, set is something that needs people to run into him in order to make use of and his ultimate, and he needs to tank damage first to get his shield, to get the W damage off. He can use his E. He doesn't really have a gap closer apart from flash, and I don't think you want to have your set flash forward and just ult a random target. And then you pick two champions, the Lee Sin. Of course, Lee Sin and LeBlanc can still go backwards, but they'd much rather go forward. They're also like two heavily early game focused champions, even though what I just said is LeBlanc can still do a lot of damage in the late game. But for Lee Sin, the longer the games goes, it gets increasingly more difficult for him to be of basically any use to the team. I would even say, what I've said to my team is that after let's say 15, maybe even 10 minutes, at least the only thing that Lee Sin is going to be able to do in a normal competitive match is kick away the front line. So if you look at the entirety of this composition, the only thing that the Lee Sin is going to do is kick the Renekton away or kick the Trundle away. But by kicking those two away, you're disabling the set from ulting somebody away. So then, if you have the set ulting either the Trundle or the Renekton who are going to just walk into the enemy team, then the Lee Sin is useless. So with picking Set and Lee Sin on the same team, you're basically disabling one of the two champions. Then of course the good thing that they have is that LeBlanc has a setup for Lee Sin to gank, because if LeBlanc hits her change, the target is rooted, you can't flash out, and Lee Sin can hit his Q and he can do the follow-it damage, and there's a chance that you can burst something. So it is a strong mid lane combo. But overall, game-wise, it is not too smart to do, because you're going to get heavily outskilled, and you're going to get to a certain point in the game where if the LeBlanc ever tries to jump in onto the Ezreal, she's going to get cock-blocked by the Trundle, going to get slapped, and she's going to get bursted down by just the natural damage that these two champions have when they have two items. So you're already increasing the difficulty for Excel to win the game after a certain amount of time. Then LDLC responds with, because I've already talked about the bans, with an R4 support pick. Of course, they like standard. They give the counter pick to the top lane, to the Renekton, also to see if the set is not a flex pick. But I still don't understand why they didn't just do it like this, and then you can pick Lulu, and then you have Lulu Ezreal, and you're gonna win the game after 20 minutes regardless, just because the combo is so insanely strong and you can survive the lane so well. But they wanted to wait until after what happened. And then in a sense, Lulu is a good pick into the set. Of course, because you have a double range bot lane, and if set is going support, then you have double range versus a melee champion. This never should, in theory and on paper, never be a fun lane for the melee champion on whatever team they are. And the Lulu also gives some extra survivability from the burst that the Excel drafted with Lee Sin and LeBlanc. The only downside to this, of course, is that it's only going to happen after a certain amount of time when laning phase is over, and when most of the turns are already gone. But I would say that, of course, like the healing and the shielding and also the utility with the polymorph that Lulu provides to the team is overall helpful. But I think that an earlier support pick would have been better, just because they could have drafted something nicer and seen what the enemy wants to do and then respond to that. But in their case, as an R4, I think a healing support is quite a nice answer, especially into the set. And this also gives a big problem for Excel, because they have one champion that wants the enemy team to move into him, and then you have two champions that are going to move into the enemy team. And I don't think, and the red team has poke, a tank to survive. They can sort of engage. They can engage on the set, because all set can do is run away. They have a tank to face tank damage. They have sustain with Lulu and safety. And then for Excel it's really hard, because you can't put Zed bot lane anymore, because if you put Zed bot lane, you're gonna lose bot lane because you have double ranged versus a melee champion. He isn't gonna have any worth in the laning phase, so you might as well just put him top lane. But then top lane, he's gonna get counterpicked because LDLC, because LDLC saved top lane counterpick for R5. And then XL is also, or people in general are limited by picking meta champions, so they opt to go for the Misfortune as an AD carry, just because Misfortune is at a 2 and 3 item power spike, so she can item power spike level, she can match the Ezreal, and in order to not have a melee range versus ranged matchup in the bot lane, they also pick in an enchanter support. And I think that even though that having double range into one melee champion is bad, but one of the ways to counter like shielding or sustain champions is to have kill pressure. And you already have a Lee Sin that needs to get ahead early game because he's going to be useless regardless late game. So why would you not just go Blitzcrank? I mean, the Ezreal can jump out, but the Lulu can't. You just make sure that Lulu has 20 deaths. They want to go hyper scale. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. I meant to do this. They want to go. I mean, Senna's banned. They want to go late and they want to go scaling. Why don't you then pick Aphelios Janna? Then you have better sustain with Janna's ultimate than Lulu's ultimate gives. You have a better scaling AD carry. The only downside then is you're stuck with two champions again that want to face forward, and two champions that want people to run into them. Let's say yeah, sorry, I have to fuck off. I just want to do this. So, but you're seeing the problem that XL has created for themselves by picking like let's say a disengaged champion, and you pick two early game engaged champions. Then there's not really a reliable bot lane combo that you can pair up with it, because if you pick a like you could pick, of course, a very aggressive bot lane, so you go Misfortune and you go Nautilus, and then yes, you have kill pressure on the bot lane, but then once you get to team fights, then the Misfortune might not be able to do a whole lot of damage because the enemy team has a tank that can face tank, and she's gonna get poked out. And then instead of Renekton, let's say they pick Maokai. Oh, they pick Maokai, and then LDLC is like, alright, yeah, okay, now you have 4 champions that want to move forward. So it's basically going to be a 4v5 map, because Zed is disabled by all the other champions that they have. Well, mostly the Lee Sin, LeBlanc, and the Nautilus. And they're saying, come at me. LDLC is going to say, we're going to poke you, we're going to survive. I'm just going to face tank everything for my team, and if you ever try to walk up and overstep, we're just going to turn on you and win the game by that regard. So, in that sense, by the B1, B2, and B3 pick, you could say that BTXL has won the game. I also think that LDLC wanted to have a lane to play through, because of course if you pick full late game, or you pick a full team that is later than what the enemy team picks, then you're not going to be able to contest anything until Zoe has 2 items, until Ezreal has 2 items, or 1.5, because if Lulu has Arden, that also counts for half an item. So they opt into the Renekton, so that the Trundle can play through top lane and try to snowball top lane, so that they can move Renekton around and still be able to do something on the map, and not just completely give up everything in the early game. I do think that like a set pick would have been better. No, not set. An Aatrox pick, just because Aatrox has a slightly more scaling. His scaling lasts slightly longer. Maybe you could even go Mordekaiser. You don't really have to 1v1 anyone in the death row, but just if Lee Sin jumps in, you can just take him out of the team. If Misfortune ults with the Nami ult, then you can take the Misfortune out if you have a nice flank. You're so slightly tanky, your scaling lasts even longer than the scaling of Aatrox. Renekton has a little bit of the same issue as what Lee Sin has in later stages of the game, is that he's just going to be a meatball. He's just going to be standing there, and I get that the LDLC want to pick something early game to have a lane that they can play through and have some agency to be proactive into the early game. As with with the Aatrox pick, or with the or let's say even a Darius pick, or VR, Garen, Gangplank, Aurelia, Jace, Jax. There's so many more champions that scale better into the late game than a Renekton that they could have picked, where they would also still have a lane to play through whilst retaining their outscaling advantage. So it's a little bit scary. Of course, the only upside to the Renekton is that his W breaks shields. So if the set ever face tanks damage and uses W, then Renekton just W's onto him and his shield is broken and you can easily kill him. But then you're already assuming that Set is going to be in the same position as a team fight as the Renekton is going to be. So that would mean that let's just assume that we're in NA and we're A ramming. So red team is just poking a little bit. They have Renekton and Trundle at the front line. LeBlanc is trying to flank. Of course, Renekton wants to get onto their backline, and Set and Lee Sin are the two people that are trying to avoid that from happening. And then either one or two things is going to happen. Either Lee Sin is going to kick the Renekton away into their own team, so the Renekton is gone, and then they still have the Trundle as a front line. And by Lee Sin kicking the engaged champion of LDLC away, Set is going to be useless, because Set doesn't have a target to engage on, and Set is just going to get poked out. So all the pressure falls into LeBlanc to get a good flank off, because maybe Misfortune gets a good ult with Nami, but she's probably only going to hit Trundle, because and maybe Lulu if she's out of position, but Ezreal can dodge it. Zoe can also dodge it. Or the other scenario that could happen is that Set ults the Renekton back into the enemy team. Will be slightly more advantageous, but it does of course require a lot of communication. And in that situation, you can dive into the enemy team with Lee Sin, with LeBlanc, with Nami ult, have the whole wombo combo that they have. But then still, I mean, LeBlanc is useful if she jumps into the enemy team, but Lee Sin is not. What kind of damage is Lee Sin gonna do into a Zoe that jumps away, into an Ezreal that jumps away, into a Lulu that polymorphs him, into a Trundle that's incredibly tanky, and into a Renekton that doesn't even want to be near the Lee Sin. He wants to be near the Nami and Misfortune. So, with the two disengaged champions on Excel's team, and not one hard engaged champion on LDLC. On LDLC side, Excel is basically already saying, alright, we're going to play a 4v5 map. And besides playing 4v5, we're also going to get outscaled. If you look at the draft, of course everybody knows different things and everybody sees things differently. But the way I look at it was just a free win for LDLC, even though on LDLC side there's still things that could have improved, but it was obvious that they were bound to win the game, just because games can't be ended anymore by 20 minutes or 15 minutes before the Lee Sin gets absolutely useless, especially in combination with Set into this enemy team, and then. Even if they maybe have like an Infernal Soul or a Mountain Soul, that would still possibly not be enough, especially not a Mountain Soul. If they have a Mountain Soul and Set is incredibly tanky, that means that Trundle is going to be incredibly tanky. So there's not a whole lot of good things going on for Excel. They have a very hard to execute draft, and it's just very reliant on good communication and a good combo, and no weird out of place things happening from LDLC's side in order for Excel to actually win out this game. Be right back. I gotta get some water because my throat is hurting. Yeah, Dios, I don't know if you're still watching, but I was only gonna do one more game. Because they only played 2 games, because then, as you can already guess, LDLC won the second game again. And they, I have to see if I have it correctly. So Thresh, I think I did though. They picked Nar and Braum and the GP and thing. Yeah, alright, yeah, I do. It's correct. It's correct the way it stands. And then, yeah, okay, so I've already spoiled it a little bit. LDLC won the game. Then, I think, why did I close the first one? So, the LDLC banned the Thresh again. Of course, Thresh is a very safe pick. They banned the Ornn again. Ornn saying, hey, we don't want you engaging on us. Even though Excel picked the set, banned the set. I mean, of course, you can trade Ornn for set and see if you can play around it. And see how you can manage to still play out the game. But besides that, of course, there's also very high priority champions in professional and semi-professional play. So because people don't really have realized that there's multiple ways you can play around an Ornn. You can go disengage with Braum, Yasuo. You can go mobility with Ezreal, Zoe. You can also go split push and just pick a Fiora and a Ryze and just make sure that the rest of your team has enough safety to never die to an Ornn engage. Then Graves, of course, also risen in popularity with the new Dev's Dev's Dance pass, Fate's Rush. It's basically just unkillable when he has 3 items, and he's also a little bit of a versatile pick together with Varus, just because he can go crit, he can go armor penetration, he can go off, well, not off tank, he can go the tanky build, he can also go lethality. And the B3 Syndra ban, where Syndra is a very strong and flexible laner. And then Excel replied with the Zoe ban, also because Syndra is like the most known or easiest or whatever. It's played a lot into Zoe, and there's also people that say that the matchup for Zoe is actually unplayable if you're versus a Syndra. Then LDLC, they actually went, they tried to show like, hey, we're the best team, so we're gonna show you how it's actually done. No, wait, no, I do have it. That's blue pick, yeah. Yeah, no, I do have it right. That's, it's so hard to read the website, but whatever. So they decided to go for the LeBlanc and the Lee Sin. Of course, all the problems that were there the previous game still stand. Later stages in the game, Lee Sin is not going to be enabled a lot. Lee Sin is mainly going to be just a kick bot to kick somebody away from the carries. Well, of course, Rakan is not a carry. From the carries that you have. And LeBlanc needs to find good engages. And even though she is most likely going to be outskilled, she still is going to have an incredible amount of burst, especially if you take away the Syndra. And Zoe. Zoe can one-tap people with a pedal star eventually. LDLC just wanted to show how they can be, how they can do what Excel tried to do, but they can make it work. So Excel responded with the Varus first pick. Of course, Varus, same as Graves, very flexible picks. They can go into lethality, they can build attack speed, crit. You can basically name it. And Varus can of course also build a depending on what build you can go Wit's End or Hex Drinker as safety versus the LeBlanc. And one of the good things is that if a LeBlanc dashes into you, there's a slight delay on the W. And Varus, in that case, Varus has instant CC with his ultimate to lock down the Syndra and basically burst her. But then again, of course, Varus is a strong AD carry. Like, there's not really something nice into a LeBlanc. Like, you probably wanted to pick Ezreal just for the safety, for the self peel. Well, what Excel did is combining it with her Braum. Probably Braum's gonna take its exhaust. That is gonna make it a lot harder for the LeBlanc to run into. But I would still say that it's, if you only look at the isolated matchup, and even though of course they're not in the same lane, but in team fights, if you only look at a LeBlanc versus a Varus, it's not looking very good for the Varus. Then on B2, Excel actually grabbed the Trundle. So I think they were convinced with what a good pick Trundle is as a sort of tiny engage tool, as an interrupting tool for the mobility that enemy champions might have. Of course, you can't really interrupt the dash that LeBlanc has. What Trundle is just has risen a little bit in priority, of course. Also because if you pick Trundle, you're basically saying to the enemy team, I dare you to pick a tank, because if you're going to pick a tank, it's going to be completely useless. I don't know, I think this weekend we had a game. Enemy also, they might have even B1 Trundle, or no, it was probably R2, or maybe even, it was R2 or R1. And then you don't want to pick a tank into Trundle, like, ideally, just because he's going to be so tanky. I think one of the things we discussed to pick into Trundle is you can just pick Malphite, because Malphite is going to be useless after ulting anyway. The only job that a Malphite has if Malphite would have come in on B4 is that Malphite has to ult the Varus and he has to ult the Corki. After that, when they're knocked up, then it's up to LeBlanc and Ezreal to finish them off. And Malphite's job is done. Doesn't matter how tanky he is. He might as well just build AP. Because Malphite's only job is to hit them. Like, he doesn't need to frontline. I mean, if he's gonna go AP, they're gonna go like full poke. He's gonna build Corki's gonna build a lot of AD, no attack speed. The Varus is gonna go lethality. But then it's still Malphite still has the same job, and it doesn't matter that you're picking a tank into Trundle, because the tank only has one job, and he can execute the job before the Trundle can make him basically a useless piece of paper. Well, of course, that's not what happened, and then there's not a lot of teams that want to pick Malphite, even though it's a lot of fun. Except for when my own team has to play against it, then they're all fucking angry. So then, with the Varus Trundle, LDLC responded with Ezreal and Lee Sin. Because I've talked about Ezreal and Lee Sin previously. Ezreal is also a way of saying, hey, I'm basically just forfeiting the bot lane until like 20 minutes, or until I get 2 items, because that's only when Varus comes online. The Ezreal comes online, not Varus. The good thing with that also is that when the Ezreal does come online, it feels incredibly good and you feel incredibly strong. And you basically, as an AD carry, or what I've heard from AD carries players, is that you forget everything that has happened before. It's alright that you lost lane, it's alright that you died a few times, it's alright that you didn't get Drakes, you didn't get the first turret. You have 2 items, you're gonna take over the game. And even with versus a Trundle as a tank, if you have 3 items, if you have Blade or Rune King, there's not a whole lot that the Trundle can do about it. Can of course also counter the poke of Varus. If Varus decides to go lethality, you just throw 1 Q at him. After you Q him, you have Lee Sin jumping in, and you have LeBlanc jumping in, and in that case, the Trundle isn't going to be enough protection for the Varus. Then Excel responded with Corki on R3. It's basically saying that, alright, yeah, you did what we did. We know that our mistake was picking way too much. We know that our mistake was that we picked way too much early game, and we just got outskilled, even though they also got outdrafted. So Excel is saying we are gonna pick the late game in this instance, so we are gonna go Corki. So at 2 items or 2 items, we have somebody that can match the Ezreal if Varus goes lethality, because lethality is cheaper. So have your power spikes earlier, and we are gonna go the poke composition that LDLC ran the first game. You're not gonna engage on us. You're just gonna go poke you out, and then there's not really anything that you can do. The only downside is what I've seen, at least even in LPL, even with was it Doinby, I think, playing Corki into LeBlanc, even though everybody always says that Corki outskills the LeBlanc. If you just farm up evenly and like you get to the same point of items on LeBlanc with 4 items, with 5 items, even though the Corki has a massive power spike, he's still with a Hex Ranker, and he's still gonna get the one shot by the LeBlanc. There's not a whole lot that he can do about it. And you can package away, you can W away, but then it's a very scary pick into LeBlanc, just because you don't have any lockdown, you don't have enough escapes or enough safety to match with her, and just the damage output that LeBlanc can do is the burst is so incredibly high that there's a little chance that you can do all the DPS you want. So BTXO, I don't know what build the Varus went. I'm just assuming that Varus' build is gonna depend on the B4 B5 pick, and Corki is mostly just gonna build AD, and he's just gonna poke, because at the moment that he has one auto attack on LeBlanc or on any member of LDLC's team, he's just gonna get poked back and jumped on, and he's gonna possibly instantly just die. So that's quite unfortunate. Excel does opt into the Braum as a defensive pick. I think of course Braum, he is a very good defensive support, because you play him with Guardian and he takes exhaust, and you have a shield to block like Qs from Ezreal. You can block a lot of damage from the LeBlanc. The only downside is that like a Lee Sin, it takes his Q and still has his W up, and LeBlanc, even though the W isn't an instant comeback, it's still relatively quick. And what I've just said is that there's maybe Varus is gonna go Lethality, and Corki's probably also gonna build a lot of AD, because he doesn't have to shred a tank. He's just there for the poke. That means that there's no quick auto attacks to block the Braum passive when he hits somebody with an auto attack or a Q. So that way Braum is a good defensive pick, but with the mobility that LDLC has, there's not a whole lot that Braum can do except for just being mid shield. Now that is the same for Trundle as well, of course. Trundle is more of a mid shield, because if LDLC doesn't opt into a tank, what they didn't do, there's no one that Trundle can efficiently steal the armor and magic resist from. So it means that Trundle is going to be a lot less tankier, and you are also going to have a lot more damage to kill the Trundle, to kill the front line that Excel has drafted. But then one of the picks that would have been a little bit safer, even though it's a very aggressive support, of course, Nautilus. But at least Nautilus has the instant CC that a Braum doesn't have. The only sad thing that you have there is that if you have a Nautilus come in on R4, they can counter it themselves with Braum. That means that if the Nautilus ever goes in, he's just gonna get insta died. No, not gonna get insta died. He's gonna get insta killed. So again, for Excel, it's a little bit of a tricky position, just because they want to poke, and they're not doing it as well as LDLC poked the first game. Even though, of course, it's still true that the Lee Sin is going to be outskilled and useless, and the LeBlanc is also going to get outskilled. Just not really hard by Corki, and because LDLC didn't draft a set, also because Excel banned it so kindly for them. You don't have two champions that are trying to do the same thing. So the Lee Sin is gonna have a job in the late game. That is, whoever runs in on Excel's side, he's gonna kick them away. That's it. That's realistically always gonna do. LDLC rounded up their draft, because they, of course, they have a strong mid lane that they can play again around with Lee Sin, same as what Excel had in the first draft. They pick Gangplank. I think Gangplank is one of the safest top lane blind picks, just because he scales incredibly hard. He doesn't need to be at the other side of the map because he can just press. He can just use his ultimate to be useful on other sides. And he still has a relatively strong laning phase compared to other champions that skill heavily into the late game. And of course, you can burst him down if you play Aatrox or if you play Riven. You can lock him down with the amount of CC that you have with your Q mechanics. But besides that, he's just very annoying. He pokes you with Q. He gets his grass procs. He gets some money to upgrade his ultimate if he clears wave with his barrels. Once he has his sheen, he gets access to a lot of wave clear. So then the thing I don't really understand is why they opted to ban the Maokai. Of course, because Maokai, you're basically giving a free lane to GP. Instead of if you press your GP, you slow down his scaling. What I've said before is he's going to scale regardless. So to absolutely shit stomp him in order to actually stop his scaling the entire game. But then again, he doesn't necessarily just need to skill. He also has an ultimate that's very useful. But maybe they banned him because then LDLC doesn't have a tank to face tank the ultimate from the Maokai. And if they wanted to pick a tank and give over the Maokai, then XL has a Trundle that could steal the stats of the tank. So then LDLC still doesn't have a tank. BTXL, yeah, they banned supports because they don't have support. Same as the previous game. Zumi Yumi is very strong with Ezreal. Bard can just roam freely because Ezreal gets such a free lane. Also because XL didn't draft any instant CC. Except for the Gnar ult. It is instant CC, but you need the Mega Gnar, of course. And then LDLC rounded up with Rakan as B5. I've also seen Rakan's being just picked first just because he can be played very defensively, and he can also be played very offensively. Just because you can ult forward, try to catch as many people in the backline of XL as they want and CC them for the follow-up with LeBlanc and Lee Sin, and then cut off the escape path with Gangplank ult. But if XL wanted to opt for an engaged champion, what they sort of did with Gnar, even though there's like they did see that the LDLC doesn't have a lot of ways to survive and engage. They have some mobility, but they don't have a tank that can face tank it. And if they would have a tank, they still didn't have a tank. So Gnar might be sort of the best option. But his engage just isn't. It's very telegraphed. When you see the Mega Gnar coming through, LDLC knows they have to back off. Maybe they, as pro players, they should keep track of all the flash timers. So then you know that Gnar has flash, you know it's going to be Mega Gnar. LDLC is just going to back off. And then if you just poke a little bit with Ezreal and you still have GP ult, then once Mega Gnar wears off, LDLC has a free time to engage because you know he's not going to get Mega Gnar soon. They don't really have any other like instant CC or like real instant lockdown. So it's very telegraphed, and it's easier to play around. And also, if at any single point the Gnar does go in, Lee Sin finally has a target that he can kick away because there's somebody that wants to be into the enemy team in order to be useful. And even if Lee Sin isn't there, the Rakan can still CC the Gnar so that they can blow him up and then safely disengage, because you've got a GP ultimate hitting the backline and there's not a whole lot they can do about it. And even if that doesn't happen and they just all want to move forward, then the Rakan can opt into ulting and CCing the rest of the team. One good Gangplank barrel in the late game, one good LeBlanc engaged in the early game, and just the entire team composition of XL is blown up. And as what happened, I haven't seen the games, but I did see, of course, that LDLC won both of the games. And I hope that I've showed a little bit how this was present in the drafts that both of the teams ran. It's just XL seems to just make it very hard for themselves to react properly to what the enemy is doing, and maybe they do have like maybe they do have a nice idea about what they want to play into certain matchups, but maybe they're forgetting to look at the better picture, or maybe they have different ideas of what actually works. Maybe it was just unlucky. I'd just say that there are certain things in these two games that draft wise could have changed for Excel, that probably would have made the games a whole lot easier for them. So that was it. Those were the little discussion about the sort of drafting fundamentals and strategies yet again, and the two games that in EU Masters from LDLC versus BTXL. Thank you very much for listening, and hope you tune in next time.